all righty, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, never mind the hair. I have bad hair days. But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, may peace and power, elevation be to all you beautiful people out there. This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. Now, I'm a little excited today, and I'm not that excited, but I am excited because hmm, where do I begin on this one? Where do I begin? You know what, matter of fact, let me go to the source real fast. Let me go to the source because see, you know, sometimes things get very problematic. And you would think people should already know, they should already know about history. But I guess history is not enough. So sometimes you have to go to the science to bring the correlation between bring the correlation, explain the historical events. Just maybe. So instead of me talking about the history of African Americans, let's go into the science of African Americans. Why is that so important? Because now we can deal with the DNA. And not only we can deal with DNA, but we can also deal with the ancestry. Okay. And there is scientific sources out there that actually confirms about our genetic. But it seemed like, I don't know, it just seemed like people don't actually take the time out to actually look for these information. I mean, it's not that hard to look up about the genetics of African Americans. It's not hard. You know what I'm saying? And this is what really brought me to this point here. This is what brought me. This is what brings it home for me because it seems like folks just don't get it. I'm about to read it. This is what makes me scratch my head. So, what inspired me to do this video is because of Yvette Carnell. So now Yvette Carnell did a video regarding to Pan Africanism, right? So in the video, she states that you're not Africans. Okay, she was referring to the Pan Africans here in America. She's saying that you're not African, so it don't have anything to do with you. So I said, so we aren't Africans in diaspora. We are just simply Black Americans with no connection or history with Africa. That was my comment to a video. And you know what the woman said to me? She said, in much the same way, finding out you have Europe in your DNA doesn't make you part of the European diaspora. So you're going to tell a European person, right, a Caucasian person that because they're Caucasian, they're not part of the Caucasian diaspora? Then she also say, let me ask, what benefit do you get from saying you're part of an African diaspora other than psychological? Now, this is where it became a problem. First of all, when you talk about African diaspora, it's not a psychological thing. It is actually who we are. This is not something that we just woke up one day and said we are African in the diaspora. No, it is actually who we are. And there is science to prove it. So, and then also she put, I rarely hear Asian talk about the Asian diaspora, etc. Why do y'all obsess over it? Why is it so meaningful to your identity? This is where I have a problem. This is where I have an issue. Why is it so meaningful to our identity? Because that what makes us who we are. We would not be Black if it wasn't for our African ancestry. We would not be where we are today if it wasn't for those African people. We have a strong African identity, okay? We're mostly composed of African ancestry. So now I have a friend of mine that I'm going to bring on here, okay? And I'm going to let him talk. So, because we're going to get into the science. We're going to deal with the science. I even have scientific sources, but I'm going to let the brother speak, all right? So let me go ahead and bring him on. Peace. What's going on? What's up? Hey, how you doing there?
Hello, hello.
Hello. How you doing? How you doing there?
I'm doing okay.
Go ahead and introduce yourself, my dear friend.
I'm brother Lionel. I'm just, I've been on a few other YouTube channels. pushing certain information. But I want to, I know that the subject is the genetics of African Americans. According to most organizations that do DNA, they have concluded that the average African American is 80% African, and the rest is like Northern European. I mean, there's some of us who are like 70%, and like I've known people who DNA test came back as like 70%, and a lot of them are like they're lighter, you know, and I've also known African Americans who are at least 90% African, like Shannon Sharp, a few of my friends, even you're 90% as well.
I'm over 90%. I'm a little over 90% African.
Really?
Hmm.
Okay, where did your? I mean, I don't want to like. Which one did you use? Like, did it tell you which ethnic
So
group?
I use 23 Me and Ancestry.
Okay.
And they both very similar. So I think 23 Me say like I'm like 90 point something, like 9.7, 9.8%, or 91%. And I know Ancestry say I'm like around, well, if you add up the numbers on Ancestry, I'm around like 92%.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't. I don't think I'm ever gonna do a DNA test because like the thing about that one is like I know a lot of West Africans and they had well there was one. I remember one day I was at Walmart and I'm gonna explain why I believe her. There was one lady at Walmart and she had she I think she was of Liberian origin. But here's the thing that I noticed. When I looked at her, me and her literally had the exact same facial structure. It was literally the exact same. And I asked her, I said, "You're from Liberia, right?" She was like, "Yeah, I'm from Monrovia." She was like, she was like, like, how'd you know? I was like, well, Monrovia is the capital of Liberia, and I just have a quick question for you. I've been told by many of my African friends who are West African that I look Liberian from my face. And I said, dear sister, by looking at me, um, what do you think I am? And she said, you're from the same ethnic group I'm a part of. You're part of the Pele people, the Kpelle. And so I looked up the Pele people and I have the exact same facial structure they do. And from a scientific perspective, that is called spatial autocorrelation, which that means that if you have people who live in the same area and they constantly mix amongst each other, they're going to be related, but not be related to the point to where they mix with each other and it's going to be incest. You know,
Okay, now say it again. What's it called again so I can look that up?
spatial autocorrelation.
Auto.
Spatial
Mhm.
autocorrelation.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. My bad. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
still here.
Okay, so let me look this up. Sorry about that. All right, so let's look up what spatial autocorrelation means, right?
Right.
All right, shoot, if I can find it on here. Okay, here it is. So now I'm about to pull it up because I want the audience to see what you're talking about here. Okay, now here it is. I'm on sciencedirect.com. And it says spatial autocorrelation is a special case of correlation, which is the global concept that two attribute variable x and y have some average degree of alignment between the relative magnitudes of their respective values. With correlation for a positive alignment, large values of x tend to align with large values of y. Intermediate values of x tend to align with intermediate values of y. And small values of x tend to align with small values of y. Now, is that pretty much of what you're describing right now?
Well, I think that's the like scientific way of describing it. But I have a friend of mine who's who has a master's in biology,
Okay.
and I can remember like, man, we talk about evolution all the time, and I had a math teacher who was of European descent who taught a lot of kids in in Tanzania,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a few Tanzanian friends, and she took like pictures of her being with the students, and I looked at the pictures, and the first thing I said was, they look just like my friend Oscar and Bosco. Like, same forehead, same lips, same nose, everything. And she was like, no, no, they don't look the same. And then I asked my friend who got a master's in biology, like, what is that, called? He said it's spatial autocorrelation. Just
Mm.
means that they're of the same ethnic group.
Mm.
You know.
Mm. And this is a Liberian sister, right? That you had a conversation with, and y'all pretty much she told you what tribe she was from again.
Yeah, she told me which tribe I look like from my face.
Okay, and what tribe is that?
The Pele people.
The Pele people. All right.
Kpelle.
Okay, you said how you spell it again?
Kpelle.
K P.
ELLE.
Okay, okay. So let's look at the Pele people. All right, here it is. All right, here's the Pele people, right? And that's what she said. She said you look just like them.
Yep.
All right. All right, so let's go ahead and look into that. Let's go look into who the Pele people are. So in case they don't know who that is, because I was told that I look like a Fulani person. This is came from the people from West Africa. The people that I used to work with. I used to work with a lady that was from Gambia, and then another lady I worked with was from Senegal. She told me they both told me that I look Fulani. I had a friend on Facebook. He was from Senegal. He said, "You look like a Fulani woman." It was just funny. I said, "I probably do got some Fulani in me. I don't know." But here's the Pele people, right? So the Pele people are the largest ethnic group in Liberia. They are located primarily in an area of central Liberia extended into Guinea. They speak the Pele language, which belongs to the Mende language family. So basically, the Pele people come out the Mende group, right?
I think so.
Okay. That's I can dig it. I can dig it. So and it says, despite their yearly heavy rainfalls and rough land, Pele survive mostly on their staple crop of rice. Oh, that sounds familiar. Traditionally organized under several paramount chiefs who serve as mediators for the public, preserve order, and settle dispute. The Pele are arguably the most rural and conservative of the major ethnic groups in Liberia. All right, the Pele people are also referred to as the Jabis, um, Pele, was it PC, Pese, Pue, Ingray, Ingray. So they have various names on here. So now we go down to the history. It says the Pele or the Garis lived in northern Sudan during the 16th century before fleeing to other parts of northwest Africa into what is now Mali. That's interesting. So the Pele people can go way back to northern Sudan, right?
I don't know very much about them.
Okay. But yeah, but it says here they go back to northern Sudan because they was there during the 16th century, and they fled into northwest Africa, which is now Mali. And their flight was due to internal conflicts between the tribes from the crumbling Sudanian Empire. Some migrated to Liberia, Mauritania, and Chad. They still maintain their traditional and cultural heritage despite their migration. A handful are still of Pele origin in North Sudan. Now, now with that being said, that's interesting. So that shows that there is some North African connection there. So let me see, what can I ask you? Do you believe that as African Americans that we got some form of North African in us?
No.
Okay. Why is that?
Well, I because I mean, for real, African Americans were mostly West and Central,
Mm-hmm.
and because we're basically, from what I could gather, like people who live in tropical environments. This is from another scientific perspective.
Mm-hmm.
People who are mostly from tribal, uh, tropical environments are basically short, maybe about 5'5" to maybe 5'7". We're not necessarily supposed to be like tall, and what's another reason? We're also lactose intolerant,
Mm. Yeah.
African Americans. And so when you go into North Africa, even though that whole area is like, as my mentor Robin Walker would say, it's Afro Mediterranean. Um, the Berbers and all those people, they can drink milk because they have that enzyme that helps them digest milk. And African Americans, Cornell University did a study on this. At least 80% of African Americans are lactose intolerant, but the North Africans aren't. So it's certain, um, you know. So I don't think we are. I don't think we're of North African origin.
Okay, okay. Maybe I should do. Okay, cool. That's a great response because you're right. A lot of us are lactose intolerant. Um, Now there are those of us that do have a small percentage of North African in us because, just like that information that was stated about the Pele people, how they came up out of northern Sudan and went over to Northwest Africa. Yeah, there was some Central West Africans who already had that North African ancestry in them. But we don't have a lot of that in us because of course they're more like distant relative. You know what I'm saying? So they're not directly descended. We're not directly descended from those people. But okay, so now what else can't you explain about us African Americans as far as scientifically is concerned? As far as the correlation now, do you know anything about the malaria and sickle cells?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'm gonna, in the words of my friend, Gullah Jibre, he said we're basically Western Sudanic Creoles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yep.
And what was the other question you said? You said,
About sickle cell and malaria.
yeah, sickle cell is. I remember I was having a conversation with my physics teacher in ninth grade,
Mm-hmm.
and he was telling me sickle cell comes about because it's kind of God's way of helping us fight against malaria. And yeah, because it thins the sickle cell kind of thins the blood cells, and malaria it's some sort of a disease that affects your blood cells. That's why you're always sick. And so yeah, it's an evolutionary disease, and a lot of us have the sickle cell trait. I mean, I don't have it; it doesn't run in my family, but a lot of us have the sickle cell trait. And here's another thing about sickle cell that people don't tell you is that there's basically about two types of the sickle cell variant. And I'm getting this from Robin Walker's work, When We Ruled. There is the benign West African type sickle cell, and then there's the Mediterranean type sickle cell as well, or
Mm,
North African sickle cell trait.
mm,
So from my knowledge, there's two different variants.
mm, mm. Okay, so what do you know as far as the one about the West African Benin sickle cell?
That's the one that most of us have as African Americans.
So now with you saying all of this, right? And now
Right.
you just broke down the science. Now, what can we conclude that about us as African Americans? That
Um. Oh, I'm sorry.
now, what can't you conclude? I mean, you broke down the science. Now, you broke down the science about the genetics, about the disease, and all that. What can't you actually conclude about the relationship between African Americans and those in the continent of Central West Africa?
We're Africans. We're just more mixed than they are. We're a mix of many different ethnic groups because of the way slavery worked. Gerald Horn. Dr. Gerald Horn, I should say. Uh, when he was on, I think Roland Martin show, he said, the way slavery worked, um, we could be that. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can still hear you.
Okay, he said, the way slavery worked, we could be a Afro Caribbean one day.
We can be what? I'm
Uh,
sorry.
we can be a Afro Caribbean one day and be a Afro Floridian the very next day.
You say we can be Afro Caribbean. What else?
The way slavery worked when our ancestors were commodities, we could be a Afro Caribbean one day and be an Afro Floridian the very next day. So,
Mm, mm.
I mean, now with the Afro like Caribbeans and things of that nature, the slave system kind of worked differently over there. If you read the Black Jacobins by the great Trinidadian historian Cyril R. James, he talks about how the slave trade in the West Indies worked. They would basically buy slaves in large lots and have them work together. But kind of what starts to happen is those Africans that they bought together, they probably spoke the same, if not similar languages. And so, and it was easy for rebellions to happen, but if you look at like how African Americans were enslaved, they bought us in small lots and separated us. So I think that the Afro Caribbeans are a lot more that, I mean, this is why, like, if you listen to their patois and stuff, that their creolized way of speaking English is a lot more that it has a lot more African elements than the African American English. At least I would gather, being an African American and speaking so-called Ebonics. So
Mm.
that they have more, from a historical perspective, they kind of have uh, a more African, you know, you get what I'm saying.
Right, right, right. Because of the fact that they have, they're more African center, like in those islands, than we are here in America, pretty much.
I wouldn't. I don't think I would say African centered, but I think the slaves in the Caribbean islands had an easier time of remembering the old ways. Like African Americans, we still have like our version of like pantheons, like High John the Conqueror in New Orleans. We still like have those, but if you look at like in Brazil, which they have the highest black population outside of Africa, some of them still worship Ogun, and but the Portuguese, they allowed them to keep that, but with African Americans they took the drum away from us, so
Mm. Now you see, that's deep. Now, all right. So, can we also argue that a lot of us African American has Caribbean in us due to the fact that the blacks was taken from the Caribbean islands and brought here to America?
I wouldn't be surprised at that at all, to be honest, because our ancestors were commodities. you know um as close as I can trace my family's from Mississippi and Arkansas on my dad's side, and then on my mom's side it's just Mississippi. But like, I think you referred to that Caribbean blood thing, because it seems like you believe that whole thing of the slaves were broken down in Jamaica and then brought here.
What? Not just that, because okay, according to a lot of our ancestry, right, it shows up that we not only have Senegambia, but we also have a higher number of Nigerian in us. And and for a long time it was thought that, it's because that our ancestors came from Nigeria in large numbers here to America. But come to find out that the Nigerian ancestry came from those who came up out the Caribbeans, right? Who was brought from the Caribbeans here to America. So those who was in the Caribbean area, they carried a higher number of Nigerian ancestry, and there were those who came from, the actual area, like the Igbo and the Yoruba people, right? That was brought over here, to places like Georgia, yeah, various parts of Georgia, etc., and the whole Igbo landing and stuff like that. So um yeah, so yeah, I mean, because if we look at it and we look at how the trade was, it was like you said, those just came out of Africa, but then there were also those who, was taken from the areas in the Latin and Caribbean areas and was brought here to work. You know what I'm saying? So it was like that, that connection that was going on.
Uh, I would say a lot of that Nigerian thing. I would have to do more research on it because I was reading a book.
Mm-hmm.
It was called The Hidden History of Capoeira by Tuvalier. I can't pronounce her name, but that's what the book is called. They were talking about the conditions of slaves in Brazil, and I believe this goes the same with Africans in America too. The average slave only lasted about 5 years before being worked to death. So what I would have to look into is where was the last place during the final years of the slave trade? Where were the slaves being taken coming from? Because that's who we are most likely descended from. The slaves who, got captured, taken on the ships in the beginning, they're dead because, they didn't particularly last that long. They didn't have time to produce children, you know. So I'm gonna have to look and see where was the last areas that was raided, you know.
Well, I mean, I could say that one of the, I mean, there was various, things that took place. You had the transatlantic slave trade, then you had the Middle Passage, then you had the domestic slave trade, right? Of course, which that was taking place inside the United States within itself. But as far as like the continent of Africa, I think the last place would be what we know today is Nigeria. But I would have to go do some more diggings, and the reason why I say that is because, like I said, the higher number of Nigerian ancestry we have, like that basically mean that part of our ancestors was taken from Nigeria, and the other part of them, and then most of them was in the Caribbean islands. So but yeah, but that's what I'm just basing off of, because a lot of us have a lot of, we have a high number of Nigerian in us, and then when we look at the history about the Igbo landing, that kind of tells it. And then like you find like the Igbo village out in Staten, Virginia, so that pretty much tells it in itself that okay, yeah, there's been a lot of Igbo people out in the in the southern region that we don't really know about. So
Yeah, my friend, you know who he is, Ibaka Lepizo. You follow him. Um,
okay, I think okay, yeah, yeah. Uh huh.
yeah, that guy there, he's my mentor. He's one of my favorite people on the planet. Um, he's he told me that a lot of people who are like from New Orleans, like the black people are from New Orleans, they
Mm-hmm.
have a higher concentration of a lot of them are Gabonese.
Gabonese. So that would be in the Congo,
I
Angola.
think,
Yeah, because I know that a lot of people from the Louisiana area, like their ancestry, came up out the Congo and Angola area. It was a lot of Congolese and Angolan people that was sent over there to those areas. Like there's a prison in Louisiana. It's called the Angola prison, and it's located in Angola, Louisiana. It used to be a plantation out there, but the reason why they call it Angola, because it referred to the people that came from the Angola area, and that was mostly on that plantation. So they changed it from that to a prison.
mm,
So yeah, more than likely they probably came from the Angola and Congo area.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, just like the people in South Carolina. Like South Carolina, they're like they have a mixture of the Barkango, the not the Barkango, what is it called? The the Bakongo people, and the Mandika people out there, because a lot of their ancestry came from Angola and the Congo. So, and even like with their speech pattern, right, their linguistic is very similar to how those in the Congo and the Angola area speak, because they, they use Geechee and stuff like that. So, and so yeah,
And
so
mhm.
what I'm saying, yeah, so yeah, there'll probably be a high concentration of the Congo and Angola ancestry with those in New Orleans.
And I think there's another thing that we African Americans should also understand
Okay.
is that our ancestors that were taken from Africa and brought, to Jamestown, Virginia, and the Caribbean islands, is that our ancestors were not warriors and fighters necessarily. The Africans that were taken were farming people, peaceful agrarian people. This is why, as you brought up with South Carolina, these people are like our ancestors were basically farmers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. And I agree. I agree on that. And but then we also have to look at not only that, the Igbo people was a warrior tribe too. They was a warrior people. They were very rebellious tribe. Also that we also have a descendant of those who were slave traders that became slaves, and those who were just slave traders.
Yeah, Eric Williams in his work Capitalism and Slavery talks about that whole dynamic.
Mm.
And even I was reading Walter Rodney's work. You're not going to be able to grab this book because it's rare, but it's called West Africa and the Atlantic Slave Trade. He talks about that whole dynamic of people trying to justify uh, the slave trade by saying there were Africans who sold other Africans. He said, yes, that's true, but the Africans that were in Africa during the slave trading had nothing to do with the European capitalist development that was happening at the time. So it's still, and he also said it was still funded and financed by Europeans.
Yeah, because the transatlantic slave trade was a European business more than it
Mm-hmm.
was an African business. It was a European business. It was um yeah, it was something that they invested in. However, and here's the tricky part about it. However, the Africans were doing business with them, but they didn't know that these Europeans really had intentions on taking over the land and resources. So they end up at the end, they end up getting got. Keyword get got. They end up getting got by the Europeans. So the Europeans found a way to ease on in there and control the land. So they done end up colonizing most of those countries. So that's why you got people who speaking French, Portuguese, Spanish, the Dutch language, and all other, and English, because these people had in mind to conquer and control the natural resources. That's what they had in mind. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So they end up falling to that crack.
yeah. The Spanish did the same thing to the indigenous populations in Latin America. Especially with the Maya, they had the Spanish when they first came over there. They allied themselves with the tribes that the I think the Maya had subjugated, and they just used them to go, and destroy the. So yeah, it's the same thing, you know.
Oh yeah. So now let me ask you this: how you feel when somebody tells you that it's not important, or why are you so obsessed over your African identity, or identifying with such as being part of the African diaspora?
I mean, knowing African American people, we're not a monolith. in terms of culture, politically, etc. So I mean, if one black person says that, then that's their opinion. Like I know what I have to do. I don't worry about certain people's thought processes that takes too long.
Mm. Okay, 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 okay. So is there anything else that you would like to share? Like any books that you recommend regarding to dealing with the science of African Americans?
Well, I'm not a geneticist,
Okay.
but I'm more of a historian. I'm really close to getting my bachelor's in May in history.
Okay.
Um, I would recommend that if people want to know the history of the slave trade, I'm gonna I recommend books that are the standard text. Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams, The
Mm-hmm.
Negro in the Caribbean by Eric Williams, A History of Trinidad and Tobago by Eric Williams, Documents on West Indian History by Eric Williams, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by the great Dr. Walter Rodney. What else? Uh, The Black Jacobins by the great Trinidadian C.L.R. James. History of Pan African Revolt by C.L.R. James. And probably like my favorite work, if you want to know from a revolutionary perspective, Slave Culture: The Foundations of Black America by Dr. Sterling Stuckey.
Okay, Sterling Stuckey. Okay, okay, okay. Okay, you said Sterling
Stuckey.
Stuckey. Okay, 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 okay. Cool, cool, cool. Wow, cool. All right. All right, the slave culture. Okay, that's great. I'm glad you put me on to him. One day I gotta look into his work. I'm glad that
Yeah,
you put me on.
it's very basic and it's easy to understand. That when you read Slave Culture, it's basically a small biography of people like David Walker, Henry Highland Garnett, W.B. Du Bois, and the tallest tree in our forest, Paul Robeson.
Mm. Hmm.
Yeah, yeah, he that book just it really like just changed my life just to know how like concise it is. It's a wonderful work.
Yes, it is. Wow. Wow. I mean, it's so many amazing historians out there that we don't even know about. You know what I'm saying? It's so many of them. You know what I mean? It's so many people who have written or did the research on like those from the Central West Africa and and connect the ties with African Americans here that we just don't really know about. Like you have put me on to some people that I ain't heard of. I'm familiar with Dr. Eric Williams' book because I have one of his books, which is uh the history behind capitalism, or yeah, capitalism and slavery. And
Hmm.
I have but I never heard of Sterling Stuckey until now. I never heard of him until now.
Yeah, he's brilliant. He's brilliant. He's also written works on Paul Robeson. He also wrote another pamphlet on Paul Robeson. It's called "I Want to Be an African." It is
Hmm.
really good.
Hmm. Wow. 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 Okay. 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 That's great. I gotta check into that. So anything else you gotta say, bro?
Um, I always just tell people to just it's always important. Well, I'm gonna leave you all with the words of Runoko Rashidi. Although I don't necessarily agree with his scholarship, a lot of the things he said are things that are very great. He said, "Come to your senses and read and study, and don't accept things based on blind faith."
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming through. Um, and I'll be with you later. So I hope you have a good one. Okay.
Yeah, I'll see you at 5 your time, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
All right then. Peace.
thank you.
All right. All right. So that goes to show you right there. Now, even though he went into the history, but the brother also talked about the information. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to get somebody else on here to help explain the science. But if not, then I'll just go into the sources. So just give me one moment. Just give me one moment. Okay, so I couldn't get that person on, but I got some sources. I got some information that goes into the science about African Americans. All right, so um unless if there's anybody that's into dealing with genetics and all of that and that want to explain the science, I'll be more than welcome to bring y'all on here. So I can go ahead and put the link into the chat if you guys want to come on here and get into the scientific knowledge about African American genome or whatever. But anyways, let's go ahead. Let's look into the information. All right. So again, we got to go into this because obviously nobody gets it right. You would think that people would try to at least make the attempt to study this and understand the connection, but maybe not. All right, let's go ahead. Let's look at it. So according to PacificStandardMagazine.com, right? And it says how slavery changed the DNA of African Americans. So widespread sexual exploitation before the Civil War strongly influenced the genetic makeup of essentially all African Americans alive today. Now, this came out December the 20th of 2017 by Michael White. Check this out. Our genetic makeup is the result of history. Historical events that influence the patterns of migration and mating among our ancestors are reflected in our DNA, in our genetic relationship with each other, and in our genetic risk for disease. This means that to understand how genes affect our biology, geneticists often find it important to tease out how historical drivers of demographic change shape present day genetics. It says understanding the connection between history and DNA is especially important for African Americans because slavery and discrimination caused profound and relatively rapid demographic change. A new study now offers a very broad look at African American genetic history and shows how the DNA of present day African Americans reflect their troubled history. And what does it say here? Slavery and its aftermath had a direct impact on two critical demographic factors that are especially important in genetics: migration and sex. The transatlantic slave trade was a forced migration that carried nearly 400,000 Africans over to the colonies and later the United States. Once in North America, African slaves and their descendants mixed with whites of European ancestry, usually because enslaved black women were raped and exploited by white men. Let's read that again. Again, you got to deal with the genetics, right? What it says, once in North America, African slaves and their descendants mixed with whites of European ancestry, usually because enslaved black women were raped and exploited by white men. If that's not telling in itself, then I don't know what it is. But you tell me, but you have people who say that, hold on, give me a second, you guys, give me a second. All right, sorry about that, you guys. But yeah. But anyways, let's just go back. All right, so that in itself is telling, right? Now check this out. It says, and more recently, what known as the Great Migration dramatically reshaped African American demographics in the 20th century. Right? So between 1915 and 1970, 6 million blacks left the South and settled in the northern, Midwestern, and Western states in hope of finding opportunities for a better life. Check this out. How this turbulent, and oh yeah, by the way, before I continue, between 1915 and 1970, let me say something real fast. For all you northerners up there, you black northerners that talk all that shit about the southern people, you better be glad. You better be glad that your ancestors provided you something that you could look back on. Because it was them southern folks that came up there and brought the culture to you guys. Okay? They brought that Harlem Renaissance for you. They brought you that knowledge of self, i.e., for example, Noble Drew Ali, who came up out of the heart of North Carolina, Virginia area, right? Clarence 13X came from Virginia. Elijah Muhammad came from South Georgia. Okay? So for those who was clowning about the South, and that's another video that I would have to get into about this whole North versus South thing and where that come from and how that came into existence. That's a whole nother topic in itself. But see, this is your history. This is the fact that your ancestors came out of these southern regions. Okay? And they helped shape various parts of the Midwest and East Coast with their tradition, with their knowledge. All right. So don't forget that you connected with the South. Okay. But let me go ahead and continue. So, how this turbulent history shaped the genes of African Americans has been unclear because until recently, most genetic studies has focused either on population from different geographical regions around the world or on Americans with European ancestry. Fortunately, African Americans are now being included in these studies on a larger scale, and several long term studies have collected genetic data on thousands of African Americans representing all areas of the country. In a recent published study, a team of research at McGill University in Montreal turned to this data to take a broad look at the genetic history of African Americans. All right, but see, this is something that you guys can look up for yourself, right? And it says African Americans with a higher fraction of European ancestry who often have lighter skin had better social opportunity and were thus in a better position to migrate to northern and western states. And what the researcher focused on nearly 4,000 African Americans who participated in two important studies, both sponsored by the National Institute of Health. The health and retirement studies consist of older volunteers sampled from the urban and rural areas across the U.S., while the Southern Community Cohort study focuses on African Americans in the South, particularly areas that have a disproportionately high burden of disease. All right, it says together these two studies are among the largest sources of genetic data on African Americans. Importantly, they represent a geographically broad sample of African Americans' population, which is critical for outlining the patterns of genetic history. Okay, now right down here, I'm gonna go down here and then I'm gonna go on to the next sources. Right. It says the research first looked at what fraction of African Americans' genetic ancestry could be traced back to Africa. Not surprisingly, the data shows that for most African Americans, the majority of their DNA comes from African ancestors. The result also showed that essentially all African Americans have some European ancestry as well. The genetic mix of African and European DNA, however, follows a striking geographical trend. African Americans living in southern states have more African DNA than those living in other areas of the country. All right, so this is 83%, and the others have 80%. Conversely, African Americans outside the South have a larger fraction of European DNA. Even within the South, this trend holds. Blacks in Florida, South Carolina have more African DNA than those living in Kentucky and Virginia. That's not enough? Okay. Well, I guess that's not enough, huh? That's not enough to explain about our genetics. Hmm? Now, if you guys want to read more into this, y'all can look up Pacific Standards, how slavery changed the DNA of African Americans. There's more. There's more to come. So I guess history ain't good enough. History does not tell our story. So maybe science got to tell the story, right? Science got to speak for us. Science got to be able to break down what we are and who we are as far as genetically, epigenetics wise, and all of that. Science got to break all that down, right? I mean, this is why we have to deal with science. This is why I keep saying anthropology, 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 anthropology. Why anthropology is so important. Why? Because maybe if we study African Americans from the culture, from the linguistics, from archaeological standpoint, because there has been archaeological diggings here in America, like places like Maryland, places in New York, and here in the South. If we study the biology, we will see why it's so important for us to study, to be connected with being African in the diaspora. This is more than a psychological thing. This is more than just psychological. All right, so let's look up another information here, shall we? Because again, this is what science say. Check this out. This is what science say. This come from the scientist.com. All right, and this came out on July the 23rd of 2020. African American genome yield insight into slavery practices, right? A massive study finds that regional differences in how slaves were treated throughout the Americas are reflected in the DNA of present day Americans of African descent. Okay, so check this out. It says a new study by a researcher at the consumer genetics company 23andMe has paired tens of thousands of genetic profiles with detailed historical records to trace the ancestry of modern day African Americans back through the transatlantic slave trade. The result, published Thursday, July the 23rd, in the American Journal of Human Genetics, confirmed some of what is known about where people in Africa were taken from and where they disembarked in the Americas. But they also yield some new insights, finding some regions overrepresented among African Americans' ancestry shed lights on secondary slave trading, while the underrepresentation of other African groups points to regional differences in the treatment of slaves. The finding also identified a sex bias in which women contribute significantly more to the gene pool of modern day African Americans than enslaved men did. Why was that? Why did women contribute to that? Because many of them were raped. And also, the laws back then, partis sequenter ventrum. Partis sequenter ventrum. Partis sequenter ventrum. What does that law state? That means you follow the one that carries. You follow the ones that carry. Partis represent offspring. Sequenter means carry or follow, right? And ventral represents the stomach. So you follow the one that carries. That's a Latin terminology. Okay, that's what it means. So since women give birth to children, right? Whatever the status of the woman is the status of that child. Because 9 times out of 10, or majority of the time, the child is with the woman. Majority of the time, the woman is the caretaker of the child. So whatever her status is, that is going to determine the status of the child. So that's why. Okay. I mean, all right, hold on. Give me a second, you guys. So peace, everybody. I got my dear friend, brother Ngozi. He's going to break down the science of African American genetics. Okay, just break down the science because that way we can better understand what why it plays a part in our history. So maybe when you deal with the science, you'll get a better understanding of the historical aspect of us. All right, let me go ahead and put you on speaker. You ready? All right, go ahead.
Peace. This is Justice Amir, better known as Ngozi. So here's the thing: African Americans represent, 11 to 14% of the population of the United States, and we are the Africans that built this portion of North America. We are African North American Creoles. The Africans of North America in our situation, because we come from a hypercultural society, creolization has taken place. Our dialects of English, AAVE, African American Vernacular English, or Ebonic, which comes from an earlier phases of Pidgin language, which picked up on Northwestern European English and formed our own dialects of it from the Pidgin languages. After that, into our Ebonic variation of it, and it's a bunch of subsets and then stratums in it when it comes to based off region and state. Chicago got its own dialects, Louisiana got its own stratum, all of us have our own stratum. So it's its own dialect or sub language within its own lane. Sometimes if you hear some people in North America, African Americans speak, you don't even know what the hell they're saying, but only they know what they're saying. So it's kind of like you could be multilingual too. We can code switch from proper English to our own dialects of English within our own thing. Outside of that, the average African American ranges between 70 to 80% sub-Saharan African, and in some cases 60%, and in some cases even 50%. Some people don't even know that they're less than 60% sub-Saharan African. So we do have, to a lesser extent, African Americans who are 55% sub-Saharan African, but a large chunk of our DNA outside of being sub-Saharan Africa, which banners us as black, or via as black, outside of that range is Northwestern European, primarily Irish or British, or in some cases even French, especially those who have Louisiana ties. So it'd be highly Northwestern or some layers of that central European component. Some of us have French ancestry. Sometimes we may have a little Germanic ancestry, but mostly Northwestern European in our ancestry. Outside of that, the smaller components would be Native American. So the European component can range between, in some cases, I'm looking at the people before the border of the South we are, like it's Africans in Carolina and Africans in deeper Savannah, Georgia. Those brothers and sisters can range between 80 to 90% sub-Saharan African. And in some cases, they can only be 10 to 8% European. Those who live in the North, we know about the Middle Passage of America, or the Middle Passage phase of America when we went from South to North. Some of us accumulated a lot of European genes. Some of us can be 25% European. And again, some of us who spent longer time with Europeans can be 30% European, in some cases a little bit higher than that. But at the average, if we can use a prox or a scaling, at average, we range between 20% Europeans, 25%, and to a lesser extent, 10%, and in some cases even smaller than that. But mostly we are mainly sub-Saharan African, coming from West and Central Africa. With that being said, we are Creole people at this time. We are mainly African, which makes us via black overall because it stands out. So with that being said, this tells the story of who we are in North America. And we mainly come from West and Central Africa, primarily those Niger Congo speakers, whether they're Benue Congo, Mindi Congo, which is Atlantic Congo speakers, or even our Volta Congo speakers coming from the Yoruba and the Igbo and those different groups of people, which is all part of the same Niger Congo language family. So with that being said, this is the story of the African American Creole, or the African North American Creole, aka African American, better known as Black in North America. That's it.
Okay. So let me ask you this. Okay. Now, Brother Ngozi, real quick, do you believe that African Americans and those in Central West Africa also have a Bantu connection?
Of course, the Central African component. So the Bantus, we're mainly West African, but we do have some Central African ancestry. And that can range between, like, if you look at our scaling, we're mainly West African from Nigeria, Benin, Sierra Leone, Togo, Mali, Gambia, those different portions. But we do have some Central African ancestry. Now, the people in Brazil have the largest Central African ancestry because the Portuguese and the people in Cameroon and Angola been going backwards and forth. But we do have some Central African ancestry. I mean, even going as far as some of the Africans who were off the coast of South Africa, near Madagascar. When some African Americans get these DNA tests, some Polynesian ancestry in between, very small signature. I don't want to speak out of my head. Austronesian ancestry. So when you get into those portions, you can see those Bantu speakers were also stripped. But yes, we do have a larger chunk of Central African ancestry, to the lesser extent of our West African ancestry. So some of us range at 20% Central African or 15% Central African. If you take ancestry DNA test, that Cameroonian ancestry is your Central African ancestry, which is primarily Bantu speakers or semi-Bantu speakers, like the Bimileke. The Bimileke people are a semi-Bantu speaking ancestry, but they all fall in the same range. So absolutely. And you had other Bantu speaking people that was also taken. You know, when these Portuguese came into Africa, before the British even got in the game, a lot of the first slaves that was being stripped, being taken to South America and what they classified as Latin America or whatever at the time, were people from Central Africa, Angola, Cameroon, in those portions. And then later on, you know, when the British takes over the game, you got to remember the first colonizers, you know, the Spaniards. Christopher Columbus Bill was a so-called Italian. He was working for Queen Isabella of Spain. And a lot of the people that was the conquistadors were Spaniards. But then you got to look at the Portuguese that took over Brazil, you know, and all these other people. The British got in the game late. You know, so when they started British starting in, and they're taking over those other cargo ships, or what was going on with Africans that was inside of it. These white boys was fighting each other on a way of building this new world that was established before 1776 as a country, which you at the foundation. Let me get that out the way, because you played a role and a hand in it, even if it was by force. So yes, you do have some Bantu speaking ancestry. but you mainly West African, and that's the Nigerian chunk of you, and that's the, the Malian parts of you, and the Sierra Leone and the Gambia, but you do have Central African ancestry, absolutely. But remember, these Bantu speakers are all part of Niger Congo. Bantu speakers wasn't always in Cameroon and Angola. And the closest thing to the earliest Niger Congo speakers are the Proto-Mindi speakers. That's why the Mandinka is so important, because they represent like an earlier phase of basal West Africans, and they also have the basal West African DNA at the largest chunk. I think they range at 18%. The Yoruba only range at 13%. So these Mindi people, or with the people within the Mindi people, are closest to the earliest Niger Congo speakers, which also played an early role in some layers of the southern portion of the early Green Sahara. Niger Congo, its proto-phase only starts around 10,000 years ago as a language family, or within a language family. And it started somewhere in the early Green Sahara, south, before it expanded deeper into the interior portions of what they classify as sub-Saharan Africa. It's been a lot of phase changes in those Holocene periods, a lot of landlocked. So you have drifters that isolated themselves and went into pockets south of the Sahara, crossing through Mali and Niger, even into early Mauritania, the early Senake people, which was a Mindi people, way before they even formed. We're talking about these early hunter-gatherers that crossed down, who created agriculture and iron smiting and all this shit before going down and mixing with those earlier days of West African, Central African hunter-gatherers and those East African hunter-gatherers that drifted there, which formed our own layers of what makes us tropical sub-Saharan West and Central Africans.
Okay. Now, I want to ask you two questions. Now, I want to ask you this. I had somebody on here, and they were told that they had an interaction with somebody from Liberia, and they asked this sister, well, where was she from? And she said she was from Liberia, and she said she was from the Pele tribe. Now, she was telling this person that he looked like somebody from the Pele tribe. And this ended. So when I looked up the Pele tribe, right, they go back to Northern Sudan. Okay. And also, he was explaining to me about the spatial auto. Let me look that word up again. Spatial. Hold on. Give me a second. Yeah, spatial autocorrelation. Okay, so can't you explain about the spatial autocorrelation and how some West Africans and Central Africans may have some form of a North African, East African DNA?
I wouldn't say that they have Northern Sudanese. I don't know what they mean by Northern Sudanese when you look into these labelings. They do have some early Sudanese, Central Sudanese ancestry that drifted in some layers, because some portions of you have to look at DNA in layers.
Okay.
So some portions of West Africans do have ancient East African hunter-gatherer DNA components.
Okay.
But when they say Northern Sudan, I don't know where the status comes from, because the Northern Sudanese is also its own hybrid, and it's separate, but it does have some layers from the Southern Sudanese. Those Nilotic people that drifted in the northern parts of Sudan, who mixed with populations who were who had their own components that became its own, because there's been a lot of isolations where people can have their own signatures. So North Sudan represents a signature.
Okay, then.
It has a Nilotic component, and even has something that's Libertine-like from early Libertine populations that drifted into those areas. But when they say Libertine, we don't know if this stuff developed independently on the northern portion of God itself, and it shared the same affinities with what they're classifying as Libertine, because sometimes these PCAs can be biased with its explanation when they explain certain things.
Okay, let me my bad. Let me break it down to you. So the information about the Pele tribe, right, in Liberia, it says that they lived in North Sudan during the 16th century before fleeing to other parts of Northwest Africa into what is now Mali. And therefore,
I don't know how true that may be oral, because just because they say this doesn't mean it's genetically true. They have probably ties to Sudan in the late Pleistocene Sudan.
Okay.
But 1500, that seems a little exaggerated. What language family do they speak?
Okay. So the language, the language they speak is Pele language, which belongs to the Mende language family.
Yeah, so it don't make sense. I mean,
Okay.
and some people may not want to hear that,
Okay.
but that seems more like an oral traditional thing. I don't see them. Again, we do have East African ties, but it's an earlier phase of East African, which is not the 15th century North Africa. That don't even make sense. I mean, these niggas must. I mean, I don't want to say niggas, but they must came in with a lot of 15th century. That's not that long ago. Um, do you see the signatures of the people in North Sudan in the 15th century based off the samples that they have? You know, just looking at the Christian era of the Nubians that was in North Sudan, that don't even make sense.
Okay.
That means that these people should have a lot more Eurasian-like signatures in their DNA to come from Sudan in the 15th century.
Okay. No, the information says 16, not 15, 6, 16.
16 or 15, I'm just saying.
Okay.
They have the Christian era and Northern Sudanese DNA.
Okay.
At this time, the Northern Sudanese had a lot of Eurasian DNA within them. So if these people got that, where's the layers and the signatures that's found in these populations?
Okay, got you. That makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, so now can't you expound on spatial autocorrelation DNA as far as like like what that exactly means?
I mean, based off what the affinities that shared phenotypically and genetically. I mean, I don't even see a correlation there.
No, I'm talking about because so when I was telling you when the individual said that he spoke to somebody
Hold on, one second, sis.
Okay. Okay. So he's gonna be back. So yeah, I see some questions on here. What about the sub-Saharan slave trade? That was longer than a transatlantic slave trade. Okay, so now that came before the transatlantic slave trade, the sub-Saharan slave trade. That came before. Okay, that was prior to. But the transatlantic slave trade was happening kind of around that time when they were doing the sub-Saharan slave trade, but that was more so of the Arabs being involved in that area, right? And the Arabs was taking people up out of like southern Africa. They were taking them out of Northwest Africa and taking them places, like what I'm saying. They took them places like India and shoot, what other places they was taking them to? Yeah, they was basically taking them places like India and various other parts. So and then the Berber people came in, the Arab Berbers, they came in and took over certain parts of Northwest Africa and like control the tribes there. And like for example, if you look at the Guanaga people, right, or Nagua people, the Nagua people, the Nagua tribe was one of those that were part of the sub-Saharan slave trade, or the trans-Saharan slave trade. They were a part of that. They were, you know, they were one of the slaves. So yeah, so that was going on before the transatlantic slave trade. So yeah, but and because of that, that was like within the region areas, that was like with the dealing with the Moors and the Guanaga and all of that. But the trans-Saharan slave trade is what was dealing with us today and how we got here to this country. So yeah, but yeah, let me go back to some more information, and then let's go back to explaining more about the slave trade, or the genetics and how it ties with slavery and all. So let's look at this. All right, so it says where I left off. It says the result published Thursday, July the 23rd, in the American Journal of Human Genetics confirmed some of what is known about where people in Africa were taken from, and they disembark in Americas, but they will also yield some new insights, right? Finding some regions overrepresented among African American ancestry shed lights on secondary slave trading, while the underrepresentation of African groups point to regional differences in treatment of slaves. Okay, so for millions of people in the Americas, the story of the transatlantic slave trade is basically a story of their ancestral origin, say Steve Michelet, a population geneticist with 23andMe, and the late Lee Arthur on the paper. We really wanted to help them better understand where their ancestry came from. So it said during the transatlantic slave trade, the largest force migration in human history that took place between 1515 and 1865, an estimate 12.5 million people were first forcibly removed from African countries and transported across the Atlantic to the Americas. While around 3% to 5% ultimately ended up in North America, many more disembarked in South and Central America or the Caribbean. Okay, so now that better explains why there was only 5% of Africans that was brought here to America, because majority of them were in the Caribbeans and South America and Latin America. Okay, so if you look in today, especially like in Brazil, they have a strong African population. If you look into the Caribbeans, right, like Jamaica, Haiti, and Barbados, they have a strong African population. If you look into Latin America, right, like Puerto Rico, you'll see a lot of strong African population out there. Dominican Republic, strong African population. Okay. Costa Rica, strong African population. And then you had people that was transported from the Caribbeans and that were brought here. So what I'm saying is like most of our ancestry, not only direct, most of our ancestry came directly from the Caribbeans, which came from Africa, most of it. Whereas the 5% came directly from the African continent. Okay, hold on. Hello? Okay,
You said now go repeat what you were saying.
so what I was saying was, I was saying, explain like, the spatial correlation DNA as far as like the phenotype of how, when people say like African American, like let's say for example, for me, like I was telling you at one time, somebody told me that I look like a Fulani person. And this came from people from the region of Senegal and Gambia. They would tell me that I look like somebody that's Fulani, and I was like, well, maybe that is kind of true. So, and what I was telling you earlier, what I was saying that somebody came on here earlier, they was talking about spatial correlation or autocorrelation, which deals with how you look like somebody in a region phenotypically. So could you expound on that? That's why I was asking. Hello?
I'm sorry, playing my children here.
Oh, okay.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So with the spatial correlation or the autocorrelation with or these affinities, you may look like something, but that doesn't mean you're directly that. Even within Fulani and Gambia and Guinea, Fulani can look different based off region. Fulani do not look the same. You know, my mother's Fulani, and she looks. Fulani don't look the same. It depends on what region you're in. Fulani and Guinea don't look like the Fulani in Gambia. Fulani and even got some Fulani now in northern Ghana. Some people were converted into Fulani. What is an ethnical Fulani? What does an ethnical Fulani look like? Because you have multiple phenotypes within this banner of Fulani. It's also clans within the Pulera. But African Americans represent a combined situation. And even them back home in Africa represent a combined situation because Fulani are not homogenous genetically. Fulani represents a combined situation. The difference between the Fulani is that they have a more ancient European component in them, in the sense of all human beings are the same age, but some mutations or allele expressions can be more recent than others. So we have more of a Northwestern European component in us, and Northwestern Europeans represent three combined situations. your Eastern Eurasian hunter-gatherer, Eastern Eurasian pastoralists who brought the Indo-European languages from the northern portions of Eurasia near Russia, which is the Yemenis, the Neolithic or Anatolian farmers that drifted from near Turkey, and the early European Western hunter-gatherers that was in Europe. All that represents the combination of what forms the Northwestern European. The Africans is different. They don't have any of the steppe European ancestry. You know what I'm saying? They have more of an Anatolian farming European component. And the Fulani, based off the lactase-consistent gene, they received the signature from early pastoralists, which makes them have this LCT gene from early Europeans that drifted into North Africa probably 5,000 years ago. And they mixed with some of the Fulani as recent as before they even called Fulani as early as 3,000 years ago. The Fulani as an ethnic group is only 2,000 years old. It's not that old. These people were already hovering around the Sahel and in the Green Sahara for a long time, but really through that Sahel for a long time before they represent this combined situation. So you have African Americans who also have this subtle mixture. Creolization just don't happen here. There's a lot of shit going on even in Africa before we got here. So you can find an African American who looks like a Mandinka. Then you have parallel evolution or convergent evolution. Sometimes similar pressures or similar situations and environments can create similar results, but when you dissect it, it's not the same. So what I'm saying is that yeah, you can look Fulani, but what does the Fulani look like? There's not a consistent look with the Fulani like it would be with the common consistent look with the Mandinka. But even they have differences even with the net. And then people get caught in this dark skin thing, and they think that all dark skinned people look the same. But they don't when you start to look at their phenotype. So yes, you can have spatial correlation or autocorrelation with these people in certain traits, but it doesn't mean overall that you are that, because shit, think about it, African American comes from multiple ethnic groups in Western Central Africa.
Absolutely. I agree, because we're like the admixture of the tribes. Because the tribes
admixture of different groups of people, and even amongst those different ethnic groups, they had a lot of changes going on. You start studying, a lot of people wasn't Mandinka at first. When you start studying the mythology of Senjata Keita, he converted a lot of people into Mandinka identity. Some of these people were just close to Mandinka, but they had their own ethnic groups before becoming Mandinka. And that's the same thing with the Fulani. Fulani raided a lot of people, and they got absorbed in the Fulani ethnic group. So that's why Fulani can look different phenotypically and sometimes genetically be distinct. Like all Fulani are not E1B1A. Some Fulani are E1A. Some Fulani are R1BV88. And to a lesser extent, some are T paternally, which lets you know they're not homogenous. And their mitochondrial DNA is also different. Some Fulani is L3F. Some Fulani is L3D. Some Fulani is L2. And some Fulani is even U6. To a lesser extent, they came from North Africa that drifted down. Fulani can differ based off regions. It's based off geographics and proximity. Most Western Central Africans tend to mix more with each other because they were closer. People in North Africa tend to mix with more people from Middle East and Southern Europe because they were closer. People in the Horn of Africa tend to mix with people on the other side of the Red Sea, near Yemen or the southern portions of the Levant, because they were closer. This is how mixing occurs. This is what humans do.
See, that's deep. That's real deep right there. You see what I'm saying? See, you go deeper and deeper and deeper, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
And not to mention, sub-Saharan Africa, people were landlocked. Those deserts was harsh to cross. Some of these people drifted down south of the Sahara before those major Holocene glacier periods kicked in. Some of these people were landlocked 7,800 years. So it's really impossible for a lot of us to be Egyptian. It doesn't make the Egyptians less African, but the Egyptians have their own story. They have their own situation. The same thing with it's impossible for a lot of us to be Nubians. They can only reach certain borders so far. Right. Human beings drifting and traveling. We have to accept the diversity of Africa.
Most definitely.
The ecosystems of Africa.
Right.
The environmental factors, the zootype, and all that. So we can tell a full story of what we are. We were landlocked. So we had our own story. So we can only mix with people in the interior portions of Africa. It's just the niggas that was in the Sahel, like the Mandinka and the Fulani, who was right south of the Sahara, who stayed at that cuff. But they were in the beginning of it, because you go through the Sahel, and then above the Sahel, you end up in the layers of the Sahara, they had ties with some of the Berbers who met at that border. So we had gold and salt trades, So the Mandinka that was up there, the Fulani that was up there, they had more ties to pick up certain Eurasian traits than the people south in the interior portions of Africa. All we can do is mix with people that's similar to us or people that was distinct from us in those interior portions of Africa because of the location that we were in. If we understand that, you can have a clear picture of how Africa works.
Okay. Okay. Yes. Now let's go into a little bit about how we inherit disease like malaria and sickle cells.
Well, we developed sickle cell, which is when we study sickle cell, the hemoglobin levels of 2A, 2B. We developed that to fight off malaria. And we developed in the early wet phase of the Sahara, which shows the Saharan imprint before we south. You only develop those resistance in order to fight off certain things and conditions that we were going in. So we developed sickle cell to fight off malaria. We also developed fast twitch muscles. This is why Africans from tropical zones tend to have more better muscle density structures than people in North Africa and East Africa. It don't take a lot. We also we're better at sprinting compared to the East Africans who's better at running. There's a lot of traits that's independent to tropical Africans that's separate from North Africans and even Horners. Even though we have close affinity to Horners in some layers because it's sub-Saharan Africans, but compared to North Africa, them niggas is more closer with their HLAs, human leukoantigens, which is their immune responses, diseases, phenotypes, with more people in the Levant and Southern Europe is shared with that Mediterranean, especially at that Mediterranean border. But it doesn't make them less Africans. It makes them distinct from population south, but they're still Africans. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So we all have our own conditions. Like when Berbers are more, Parkinson's disease probably had its root in North Africa, and they're more prone to catching that more than we are. You get what I'm saying? So we, look up Parkinson's disease origin in North Africa. If you can type it up, there are more certain conditions people are more prone to catching quicker. Not saying we can't catch it, but it develops in certain. Again, we're talking about allele expressions. We're talking about certain signatures that express itself at the clinal and Demi level. It doesn't dehumanize them more. This is just how we develop and based off different regions. So yes, our sickle cell was beneficial for us to fight off malaria in those wet phases of the early Green Sahara. And we took that shit with us, south of the Sahara when people drifted down. And then some of us, especially men who carry this haplogroup E shit, it could have came from the Kepians. And the Kepians could have picked up traits from their, it could have, this postulation from people that they were closer to that were Ibero-Marusian likes. And the Ibero-Marusians in early North Africa were a layer of Assyrian Africans who split from early East Africans 100,000 years ago and went north, who lacked a lot of the later derived mutations that we had. And also some Eurasians that back migrated, primarily those Dzulu Zanda, who that crossed over from Iran 30,000 years ago and met up with them. So they found some Eurasian traits in the Yoruba that ranges between 12.5 plus 1.1%. But this signature is not fully Eurasian. It's certain layers that came from an earlier Eurasian component. But when they went south, the sexual selection and mixed with more of those earlier hunter-gatherers that drifted from East Africa that had that, and Central African, primarily hunter-gatherers who were very similar to Mbuti groups, and Basal West Africans who had some traits that was from ghost populations who were very close to earlier archaic Homo sapiens like Jabella Hood. This represents our combined situation.
Wow. Wow. Yes. See, it's so deep. This is why we got to understand the science. So if we understand the science, then we can understand the history. So this is why I had titled the video "Science of African Americans versus History of African Americans," because if we get into the science, then it will bring the correlation to the history.
But African Americans are also developing independent mutations right now that's separate from the continent. Like African Americans and European skulls are getting thicker and larger. than the populations that they descend from.
Okay. Can you break that down a little bit?
Well, certain because of the things that we've been through here and certain traits that we picked up on here, evolution don't stop. Mutations don't stop. Changes don't stop. Selective pressures is always working, which causes those changes. So they said we're going to have distinctions that we start to form independently that people that stayed on the continent don't have, or that they're accumulating their own traits. Mutation evolution is not a regional thing; it's a global thing. So if you type up African Americans and white American skulls are thicker, are getting thicker, and getting larger, that's a trait that we're developing independently here. Evolution is working right now amongst us.
That's interesting.
Some of us are carrying conditions that's more common in that Northwestern Europeans are formed because they had their own conditions. Some of us is carrying a lot of those conditions. It was more common for white people in some cases to develop traits like cystic fibrosis. You got white blacks catching that shit now. You got white boys who have certain traits of sub-Saharan African DNA. They have the strand of sickle cell that developed in the Congo or in Central Africa. This is what happens with the game of creolization. So we're developing traits that's distinct, and it doesn't make us less African. Because to me, African American culture is exterior African culture. It's part of African culture, the diaspora, but it's our own unique situation based off our lifestyle.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, all Homo sapiens are Africans. We're all African apes, whether people like it or not. But we have to accept the changes and the differences that occur. Even if my OG is Fulani, I'm not Fulani. I'm African American. She don't even practice a lot of the customs that they used to practice. My mother been here for a very long time. So with that being said, we have our own unique culture and identity, which delineates us from the people that still practice those customs. Not saying that you can't repatriate back into it, because I repatriated back into the Mandinka culture. That's what I identify as. But I also recognize the uniqueness of what formed my set culture from the situation that occurred here in North America, which makes me be an African American. And that's just what it is.
Oh yeah, most definitely. So now
it's 40 million of us. That's an ethnic group within itself.
Yes, most definitely. So now, how important do you think it is for us to be able to have that relationship with the other part of African diaspora? Hello?
You said what?
How important is it for us as African Americans here in America, or Africans in America, to have the relationship with other Africans in the diaspora?
It's important. At this point, it's important, and at this point, it's not important because the game that we living in is capitalistic society. It's either you get in or you fit in. It benefits you to network with people anywhere as long as it's beneficial. So having a network with people back home, and if it benefits you, definitely have a network. But this shit is about, at this point, survival. No one's going to do anything for nothing. If you are deeply into your roots, connect with it. And if you live by those customs, that's what you are. If you don't want to have nothing to do with a person from the continent, you don't have to. So I think it's based off the individual. Because at this point, you got people that don't know shit about Africa, and they're Black Americans, and they're living just fine. You got Africans who don't know shit about Black Americans and don't want to have nothing to do with them, and they're living just fine. So it's about what you choose to do while living.
Okay, that's cool. You're right. That's cool. Yeah.
Me personally, I love Africa. I'm African. I choose to be African, and this is my choice, and no one's going to take that away from me. So with that being said, it is what it is. Don't cross my line. Because I am an African, and I'm a Pan-African, but am I exaggerated Pan-African in the way the older model was? No, because I know Pan-Africanism is not a reality. This is something that we all strive for. So I meet people at that level. I meet people that stand by the customs of Pan-Africanism. But would it ever be something that'll happen? No. Human beings are cruel. People are going to do what the fuck they want to do. No one's never going to be on one accord. That's just our nature. So I relate to those who relate to me. That's my tribe. That's my clan. That's my people. I ain't trying to make it a reality. It's only a reality amongst those who choose to live by the customs.
Deep. That's deep. That's right. That's right. That's only fair. That's only fair. That's only fair. That's really fair. So yeah. So I pulled up the information about the thickness of the normal skull in African Americans and whites. So
Uh-huh.
yeah. I'm gonna have to look.
Why don't you read it, a little bit of it,
Okay,
to
sure, no
show the
problem.
audience what's going on?
Sure,
You
no
know,
problem, no problem.
Justice Amir just don't make up shit. This is what's going on.
Right. I know you don't. I know you don't. I know you don't. I know you don't at all. I mean, cause I mean, how can't you make it up if you study a lot into this? You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Yeah.
But I want the audience to hear what's going on. Evolution is always working.
Yeah.
It don't stop.
It ain't gonna stop. Hold on. I just had it. Let me pull it back up. You right. Evolution don't stop at all. It ain't gonna stop. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we
And
gonna.
our sickle cell that we have, especially us with the trait, is a reminder
Mm-hmm.
of our African tropical roots.
Mm.
So it's still in us. So it's a beautiful thing.
Right. It ain't going nowhere. I mean, well, it ain't going nowhere anytime soon. That's what I should say. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
All right. So right here, it talks about the thickness of normal skull in American blacks and whites. Okay. So this was something that came out in 1975, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So it says here, in living patient, estimation of skull thickness is generally accomplished by measurement at certain arbitrarily selected points on radiographs. Ultrasonic techniques have not been utilized systematically to our knowledge, but would also require selection site to be investigated. All right, so it says in most prior reports on attempts to measure skull thickness, the investigators selected sites for measurement which differ from the one study to another. Todd's site for measurement were followed by Roche, but only incompletely. Moore developed his own site selection, although he recommended Oldberg's method for subsequent studies. All right, so these are the people that did the research. All right, so let's go further down. Okay, so right here it talks about the materials and method. So it says the material study consists of 500 consecutive normal plain skull radiographs obtained at the emergency room of the General Hospital of Cincinnati between February and May of 1973 on patients from 5 weeks to 80 years. Only true lateral radiographs were accepted. Most of them were obtained in the course of managing patients with non-clinical traumatic emergency, which were otherwise supposedly normal. All lateral radiographs of the skull were taken with a bulky grid and with the same target film distance and film tabletop distance. Thus, geometric factors were constant and magnification approximated 10% for all patients, right?
Uh-huh.
So it says all measurement of skull thickness were obtained by one of us without prior knowledge of the age, sex, and race of the patient. On the lateral skull, film measurement were made at 4 arbitrarily selected reference point: A, 3 centimeters anterior to the coronal stitcher; B, 3 centimeter posterior to coronal stitcher, or was it? Oh, suture. Excuse me, suture. C and D, 3 centimeter superior and interior to the lambdoid suture, respectively. The site for measurement were located with a ruler, which edge lay along the site of reference suture on the exterior surface of the calvarium and cross the external surface of the bone to be measured at a distance 3 centimeters from the reference suture. A line perpendicular to the tangent at the site was then drawn and the measurement made along it. When open for tunnels precluded exact identification of the reference. And it says, and it said, yeah, the reference center for measurement, the point on the frontale towards which the lateral segments of the reference sutures were converging was selected as the reference point. The lateral situation obtained only in a very small number of the youngest age group, in whom, incidentally, normally thin collateral bones adversely affect the range and consequently the coefficient of the variation in the group. So it says the patient comprised 162 black males, 138 black females, 127 whites, and 73 white females. Each sex group was subdivided into age decades. So a graph of the average thickness of the bone in each race sex age group was constructed for each of the four sites measured. So it goes on to say the values obtained were subject to statistical analysis in the computer center of the University of Cincinnati College of Medicine to compare the race sex groups and males and females within the same race. The means and standard deviation were obtained for each reference point for the groups and tested significance calculated for the numerical differences noted. All
Uh-huh.
right. So, and they say the results. So, in the four race sex groups, at each reference point, there was rapid increase in skull thickness during the first 2 decades of life. During the third decade, obvious differences in the four groups were seen at A, C, D. Relatively small increases in skull thickness occurred from then on to reach a maximum in the fifth or sixth decade.
Right. So we have a lot of things going on that's unique to the African American.
Mm-hmm.
We have a fixed ethnic group now. We have a lot of changes in genetic shifts occurring. There's a lot of things occurring. Like shit, 40% African American men have um, paternal lines that go back to northwestern Europe. 60%, and this is the estimation from the early. I don't know if it decrease or increase. 60 and possibly to 70% of us have sub-Saharan African paternal markers, but not all of us. But we're all classified as African American. And I want you to take a good look at African Americans, and you can see that 15 to 25% Northwestern European in us. You can see it.
Mm-hmm.
You can also see the larger chunk of. Look at the undertone of your skin. Look at how it is, and look at your morphology. You know some layers that you even have some mixed limb proportions. So there's a lot of changes occurring in us.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why it's important to understand our bodies, our functions, our immunities. And if we understand this fully, we can understand how to take care of our bodies. You might have certain immune responses based off that little 25, 15, 10% Northwestern European. You might have a lot of immune responses to those people that's very similar in expression.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have the combination of your certain similarities that's very similar to populations in sub-equatorial Africa. You have all this combined situations occurring that's responsible for how you function. And it doesn't represent separate from the species, because I believe in evolution fully, and I don't believe in race. But I do believe in accept the traces and the differences that exist at the demi level or at the cline level, that how alleles express itself. So we have to learn to work with these alleles and cope with ourselves and how they express themselves, on how to take care of it. Some shit is just hereditary and you can't even control it. We have to accept that part of nature.
Yeah, see, and that kind of goes into the epigenetics, but that's another topic in itself.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah, that kind of goes into that. And last question: how did we end up becoming lactose intolerant?
I mean, some of us never come from pastoralist groups who were lactose intolerant. I mean, who were able to deal with the lactase consistent gene. So a lot of Bantu speakers and people from West Africa, they already were lactose intolerant. For those who don't have the lactase consistent gene, I mean, for what I'm trying to say is like the Fulani groups, they have the LCT gene. They can drink milk. Some of us can't drink the shit because a lot of the Niger Congo speakers and Bantu speakers couldn't drink it anyway. Just like Native Americans, they didn't deal with a lot of milk. So why would they have the LCT gene? It's not beneficial. Now, if you come from pastoralists who are able to drink milk, they can deal with it. But a lot of us are not that. I meant to say the Bantu speakers are not. They can't drink milk. They don't have it. A lot of the Mendinka don't have it, but a lot of the Fulani do have it. So I want to regulate how I express that.
Okay. Well, that's great. So Ngozi, I really appreciate you coming through, breaking this down, explaining all of this. I know it's a lot of information, y'all, but again, when you deal with science, that's a lot of information. It goes into deep research. Like, you really have to study a lot into this. So I hope y'all was able to pick up on what the brother was saying. If not, I would recommend y'all to study anthropology. So now,
and biology,
but biology goes into anthropology. That's one of the like category of that. But yeah, you're right though, Ngozi, you're right.
All of it. They got to study all of it.
Oh yeah, most definitely. So what recommendation of books would you give to people to study about genetics and genomes, especially deal with us?
We need to get involved in understanding human biology.
Mm-hmm.
Need to get involved in understanding books on anthropology and
Mm-hmm.
just understanding human morphology and human anthropology. Bioanthropology is a field that people should get involved with. Even if you take a course, Shamaka Kenta or Soikiata he's a bioanthropologist, but just get basic books on biology and learning human anatomy and how cells work and how genes express itself and how alleles work. Um, Start taking these courses, get involved in it, get involved with anthropology. Free your mind from the idea of race and understand what made up a race, these social constructs. Once you free your mind of that, you accept the quality of the human being fully. Me
Mm-hmm.
personally, at this place, I don't even believe in race. I
Mm-hmm.
see all humans as African apes. I mean that shit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that the next person that looked different than me on the surface wouldn't look at me as whatever disrespectfully, and I don't give a fuck if he do. I oppose anybody that opposes me. I don't give a fuck what you look like. You could be as black as space. I don't give a fuck. But what I'm saying is, I don't base things off that. I base things off the actions and characters of the human. And anybody that truly understands biology on a larger scale, we don't play the racist game.
Mm-hmm.
If they do, they on some bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right about that. You're right. Oh, I meant to ask you that. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I fully accept the differences of how humans express themselves, and also understand that's what comes with the game of how gene expressions. It's just life.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, facts. I meant to ask you this. Are men's skulls bigger than women's skulls?
Men's skulls bigger than women's skulls. Men's skulls can be bigger than women's skulls. Men's
Oh,
bone density and body masses tend to be larger. If you start studying basic stuff like BMI's body mass index,
or dimorphism?
yeah, of course. When you start studying that, I mean, limb proportions of a man should be broader and thicker. That's just basic stuff. You can learn that just going to learning about BMI's, body mass index. So, I mean, it depends. But you got some big head ass sisters, women out here. Shit.
Well, is our brain bigger? I mean, because I
Uh,
read somewhere that men brains are bigger than women as well.
I don't know. That's exaggeration. You got to. That's again. Now you got to get into understanding the field of neurology and understanding the brain, what makes up the cerebral cortex, the neural cortex, the cerebral cortex, gray matter, colostrum, and all that shit. I mean, come on.
Okay. I was just curious. I just wanted to know.
No, I know that's just for the audience, though. But yeah, get involved with that, and that's a good thing that you ask those questions. You got a scientific mind. Learn about it.
Okay. Yeah. I got a lot to look into. I got a whole lot to look into. It's a lot of.
And that's the thing about living. When people stop learning and they feel they know everything, because I don't know shit. I could be wrong about a lot of stuff, and I love it. You know why? Because it shows I'm alive. When people feel they know everything, and if they do know everything, that's the most miserable person in the world, because you know everything.
Right.
What's the point of you being here?
Exactly.
So always learn. Keep that brain active. Keep them dendrites and synapses functioning as long as you can. Even when you're wrong, appreciate your wrongness so you can learn to get it right. That shit is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Our errors.
Yes, most definitely. All right, then. It goes. I appreciate you coming through and explaining the information. It's great to have you. So I'm gonna go ahead and let you go. I hope you have a good one, and we'll reconnect again.
Yeah, I gotta get these children. I'll let you.
Okay, then. All right, then. Take it easy. Peace. All right, so you guys, that was that information from Brother Ngozi. Again, he did a perfect job at explaining the science of African Americans. Um, so again, like he said, it's just important. You have to just really study, and you have to get out the mind frame of dealing with the concept of race and just study humans as a whole, because we all humans. No matter what our ethnic background is, what our race is, and all of that, we have to deal with the humanity component, and then we can get into the aspect of dealing with the genetics and ethnic group and how the idea of race came into existence. You know what I'm saying? So So yeah, people have to really study into those things, study into those factors, you know. But as you can see, that's the breakdown of scientific African American history. And I can go on and on, go more into a lot of things, but you know, you guys kind of get it. So let me just show you one last thing, then I'm about to go ahead and end this video. So one last source I want to show y'all real quick. Okay. So this source right here, this came out in 2014. Okay. This came out in 2014. Check this out. It says science.org, right, which deals with genetic studies, reveals surprising ancestry of many American. Some African American, European American, and Latino carry genes that don't match their self-identified ethnicity. This came out December 18th of 2014, right? Okay, so check this out. It says in the United States, almost no one can trace their ancestry back to just one place. And for many, the past may hold some surprises. According to a new study, researchers have found that a significant percentage of African Americans, European Americans, and Latinos carry ancestry from outside their self-identified ethnicity. The average African American genome, for example, is nearly a quarter European, and almost 4% of European carry African ancestry. Pretty much what Ngozi was talking about. Until recently, human population geneticists have tended to ignore the U.S., saying Joanna Mountain, a geneticist and senior director of research at 23andMe, a company in Mountain View, California, that offers genetic testing. With its long history of migration from around the world, she said the country was considered to be kind of messy in terms of genetics. But Mountain and her colleagues thought that they might have a fighting chance of deciphering Americans' complex genetic ancestry. Their secret weapon, 23andMe, huge database of genetic information, right? So now check this out. Going down just a little bit. It says the team started by looking at the average genetic ancestry of three largest groups in the United States: European American, African American, and Latinos. Those categories are based on how 23andMe customers define themselves. But as you might expect in a country where different groups of people have been meeting and missing for hundreds of years, the genetic lines between the group are quite blurred. You see all those different ancestry in each of these groups. Bart explains the average African American genome, for example, is 73.2% African, 24% European, and 0.8 Native American. The team reports online today the American Journal of Human Genetics. Latinos, meanwhile, carry an average of 18% Native American ancestry, 65.1% European ancestry, mostly from Iberian Peninsula, right, and 6.2% African ancestry. So, I mean, again, this is dealing with the genetics. See, check this out. The new study adds unprecedented level of detail to patterns that had been noticed in previous, more general studies. For example, 23andMe data reveals that the proportion of different ancestry, even within one self-identified ethnic group, vary significantly by state. Latino with the highest portion of African ancestry, about 20%, are from Louisiana, followed by states such as Georgia, North Carolina, New York, and Pennsylvania. In Tennessee and Kentucky, Latinos tend to have higher proportion of European ancestry. And in the Southwest, where states share a border with Mexico, Latinos tend to have higher proportion of Native American ancestry. So it says at least 3.5% of European Americans carry African ancestry, though they average varies significantly by state. In South Carolina and Louisiana, about 12% of European Americans have at least 1% African ancestry. In Louisiana, too, about 8% of European Americans carry at least 1% Native American ancestry. Okay, and it says in many states, the history of the region is written in the genomes of its current residents. Louisiana, for example, was trading hub where different population met and mingled. But sometimes the stories are even more specific. Oklahoma is the state where the most African Americans have significant Native American ancestry. Bart noted that contact can be traced back to the Trail of Tears, when thousands of Native Americans were forcibly relocated to Oklahoma, which was also home to a significant number of Black slaves. You can really see historical events and historical migration in the genetics. Barr says, we weren't actually expecting to be able to see that as clearly as we do. Now, It's very funny when they talk about the Native American ancestry and African Americans in Oklahoma. I believe that to be true because that's where a lot of Native American were at that time period. So, and Native Americans also had African slaves of their own. So, in various parts of the region, you will find that African Americans have a high percentage of Native American in them, like Oklahoma, Texas, parts of Louisiana, right? Because of the Creole mix. So yeah, you'll see a lot of that. You'll see a lot of that. Um, and as the brother Ngozi mentioned, that also there's the evolution taking place. So we constantly evolving every single day as a people, not just here in America, but also just all over the world. So there's slow changes taking place. Okay, so what we look like now may not be the same 200 years from now, 300 years from now, 400 years. You know what I'm saying? So there's going to be changes always taking place, always occurring. You know what I mean? Because we're constantly evolving. But I do believe that this is just my opinion. Maybe I could be wrong, but I do believe that more African Americans are going to start having relation with those in the continent of Africa, and they're going to produce more of their own African American African creation. You know what I'm saying? Or I believe that more Afro Caribbeans are going to start having more relationship with African Americans, right? Or other Afro Caribbeans and other regions, and just have their own, you know what I'm saying, their own genome type, you know what I'm saying? So I mean that's just what I see, because I see that a lot of that is happening, but at the same time, everybody going down to a different route. So everybody's not going to go to the same route. You know what I mean? So yeah. So that's just part of dealing with evolution, changes. Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, pretty much. If you guys want to look in more to this information, you can deal with the science.org. All right. But that's all I have for today. I'm gonna go ahead and log off of here. And I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Shout out to Brother Lionel for coming through. Brother Perry. Shout out to Brother Ngozi for coming through and having this dialogue. Again, we guys deal with the science. So maybe when we deal with the science, we'll understand the importance of why we connect with the African diaspora, why we study about African history. Okay. And how we are, what I'm saying, why we're a part of that. So getting back to what Yvette Carnell said about the European and not being part of the European diaspora, that's the European. The Asian and not being part of the Asian diaspora, that's the Asian. The Asian people and the European people, work hard to study and connect with their ancestry. Okay, so why can't we? Why can we not connect with our African ancestry? Why can we not study about our African history? Hmm? Why can't we not build something with those in the United States and those in the diaspora and other parts? And I'm getting sick and tired of hearing that, oh, those people don't claim you. I'm getting sick and tired of hearing that shit, because guess what? Everybody ain't gonna claim you. Hey, even your own family don't always claim you. You could be from the same bloodline and you don't always get claimed. Okay. I'm just tired of hearing that bullshit, because that's, to me, that's a blanket statement. Not only is a blanket statement, but it's a tap out to say, well, those people don't claim you. Hell, you don't claim your own family members. We see it all the time. Sometimes our daddies don't claim us. Everybody daddies don't claim them. Everybody mama don't claim them. Everybody brothers and sisters don't claim them. Especially, don't let it be from the daddy side of the family. Oh, we ain't brothers and sisters. No, my daddy ain't your daddy. Where you come from? Oh, we don't want to get into that conversation, right? That's a whole nother conversation in itself. Now, if you came from the same mama, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna claim each other. 9 times out of 10, I mean, that that's your sibling, because y'all came from the same mama. So 9 times out of 10, you was with your mama, right? For the most part. But if you came from the same father, most of the time you're not with your father. Okay, because you're in different household with your mothers. You each have your own mothers. Y'all have different maternal line. So it's going to be very problematic. So it's going to be that issue of, oh, they ain't my sibling. I don't claim him. I don't claim her. We don't know you. This ain't other. I mean, we don't want to get into that conversation, okay? Because that's a serious thing. So when the same people that talk that mess about these folks don't claim us, hell, your family member don't always claim you. People in your same city don't always claim you. Hell, they'll say we don't claim them because they ain't from this side of town. We don't claim them because they not from this part of the city. You know what I'm saying? So, so it always happens. I mean, but I'm tired of hearing that shit. That shit is lame as fuck. That shit is dead. Like you ain't getting nowhere. Like you can cut it with me because I ain't trying to hear that shit, bro. Like you could talk that bullshit with somebody else, man. I just hate when people try to discourage folks from learning and knowing about the history that plays a part in them. That has a lot to do with them. Like, don't discourage people from that. If you're gonna talk about being a descendant of slaves, you got to get into the science of that. Okay, you got to get into the history of that. You cannot just leave out the African part, because then if you leave out of that, then you might as well not even talk about slavery. Period. You might as well not even talk about being black. Period, or what you call black, because that is a part of you. That is a major part of you. That is the major component of you. How can't you cut that out the picture? How can't you say, well, let's keep everything else, but the African part gotta go? How can't you do that? That's just like taking a chunk of your heart and chopping it up. How do you survive like that? How can't you do that? That's just like taking a piece of your brain, a large part of your brain, and chunk and just cutting it up into pieces. How do you do that? Dr. John Henry Clark says this the best, and I'm just gonna log off. He said, if you take Africa out the picture, right? If you no, he said, if you don't bring Africa in focus in the relationship to the African people of the world, you are out of order. You are out of order. You might as well talk about a child without talking about his mother and his father. That's what he said. If you do not bring Africa in the focus in relationship to the African people of the world, you are out of order. You out of order. You have to, I mean, if you're going to talk about history, especially us black people, you got to bring Africa into the picture. Whether you don't agree with the politics or not, you know what I'm saying? Whether you like what they did, it happened. Okay. None of us like that. None of us like the slave trade. None of us like the fact that there were our ancestors that played a part in it as far as selling our people, right? Trading our people off to the European. Nobody likes that. But that is the part of the history. That's the part that we have to accept that, dang, this happened. And if you're going to talk about reparation and all of that and getting what is owed to us, right, from not just the Europeans, but from the African, then why not even try to connect with the African people? Why not even have a conversation with them so that way you can have an opportunity with repatriation, right? Repatriate or going back to the continent or being able to gain some form of reparation. Why not have that dialogue? So when people argue about reparation being global, I mean, we have to really think about it. Slavery was not just a United States business. It was an international commodity. It was not United States business, okay? It's not something that was just done by the U.S. You got to look at everybody that played a part. U.S., right? The British, the Dutch, the Swedish, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the French, people from Belgium. They played a part in that. They all played a part. So we got to bring in the European nation that was a part of that and that benefited off of the slave trade. And then we got to look at the Jews that own some slaves. Yeah, Jews own slaves. The Irish own some slaves. A lot of slaves at that. The Native Americans own slaves. Then if we want to get technical, let's talk about the free blacks that had slaves. And then let's talk about the fact that we are not only descendant of those who were enslaved, but also those who were slave traders and those who went from being slave traders to becoming slaves. Like it's very technical. The history itself is very technical. It gets in. You got to get into the nitty gritty of all of this. You really do. You know what I'm saying? You really got to get into the nitty gritty. All right, shout out to Centavo. I'm gonna read you guys comments real fast. Um, and then I'm going to go ahead and log off. Yeah, let me go ahead and read the comments real fast. Okay, so I have to start with my phone because I may not see everything on the computer. So, hold on, you guys. All right, so I don't see anything on here. All right, so let me see what I can find on here because everything don't show up. All right, so shout out to Big Cree Money, shout out to Vinyasa, shout out to Norman, shout out to Centavo. As always, thank you, Centavo. I appreciate you. Yes. And Centavo put my family from the Caribbean and they're more African than anything. Oh yes, because a lot of Caribbean preserve African culture. Yes, they preserve that a lot. So yes, that's why you find so many of them that's more African than the people here in America because they kept up with the African tradition. They were in the islands, so the islands kind of pretty much bring a reflection of the tropical areas of Central West Africa. So it was a pretty more open for them to practice the tradition culture. Whereas in America, we didn't get that opportunity like that. But if you come down south, you'll see a lot of that than you'll see anywhere else. Very little Spanish or Portuguese indigenous. Okay. Thank you for the hair compliment. Yeah, that's that nigga hair. I got that African hair. I got that African, I got that nigga hair. African hair. That Negro hair. That African, I mean that Congo, that that Niger Congo hair. I'm just playing, but no, that's the African in me though, for real though. Okay, so what he said West African DNA is from Congo and Cameroon. That's cool. And my man's over here put shout out to Brother Gullah. Shout out to Griot TV. Make sure y'all check out Brother Gullah on the Griot TV. He does his thing over there. He said Stono Rebellion, those Angolians were doing a Congo war dance. Oh yes, a lot of them did do that. But they had to disguise it though. But they did war dance. Yes. Shout out to Namie Ubuntu. I think I know who that is, Mr. Robert Rand. Shout out to my brother Robert Rand over there in Name Ubuntu. I see you. Shout out to you long time. Yes, his work is invaluable. Yes, I recommend people look at Walter Rodney's work. Um, yes, I do have that. I recommend you guys reading that book as well by Chancellor William. But his book really goes more into like North Africa and Egypt. Yeah, that's what his book go into. All right, so I already answered that question. Bars and chains. Peace, Yaya. How you doing? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your compliment. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yes. Yes, thank you so much, Centavo. Thank you. All right, then, y'all. Make sure y'all like and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. Share the channel. And I will keep you guys posted. And until next time, peace and power and elevation be to all of you. This your girl, Tiffany. And shout out to the Africans in America. Shout out to the people in the diaspora. Shout out to the brothers and sisters out there in the continent, the Caribbeans, Latin America, man. Shout out to everybody that's tuning in, that's watching, that's supporting. Thank you guys so much. Y'all take it easy on yourself, man. Be safe. Real talk. Peace. All right. I'm gone now. Deuces.